how do we create our best work in the world when all of the context and all of the conditions around us are trying to mechanize and encourage and exploit the fact that we have this dopamine need, longing, and we are constantly seeking to get little hits of gratification from instant sources such as social media validation and posting and things like that, and even consumption of bright shiny things and thumbnails that lead us down this YouTube algorithm rabbit hole, often in strange hours of the day or night. Speaking for myself at least. This video will talk about overwhelm, neurodiversity and ADHD, and the kind of prevalence of the ADHD mind and mode in our hyper digitally connected, oversaturated space-time, as well as how dopamine relates to serotonin. And dopamine is like not necessarily a bad thing, but it's the molecule of more, whereas serotonin is the here and now hormone, and how flow state and things like being in connection, which come from that sense of dropping in and being in flow, are around presence and being here, not in pursuit, which is what dopamine is all about. So the first thing is that in today's day and age, we are incredibly overwhelmed with stimuli. Even people that are not on social media, and there's very few of them, are definitely experiencing this. Even just WhatsApp and WhatsApp groups, or whatever medium you're using, the number of communications, messages, things we get intruding into our consciousness and awareness on a daily basis is massive. And this really correlates to the kind of condition of the age, which I believe ADHD is. And I believe ADHD symptoms, whether it's just like particularly prevalent in people with a certain trauma or predisposition. Gabor Mate talks a lot about this, whether it's nature or nurture, or whether a lot of it's environmental and is arising because of the way that we consume technology and the way that we interact with 7 million tabs at once. This idea of overwhelm and the idea of having a lack of dopamine, that you need to constantly strive for more and get it from the most instant, quick source possible, is really resonating, I think, with a lot of people right now. And that's why we're getting a lot of people seeking diagnosis, seeking medication for these things, and also just searching for the ever elusive capacity to be in presence and have some focus on one thing at a time, which is easier said than done. Also, there's a kind of trauma, like addiction piece to this, which is that shallow, being on the surface of things and going for like whatever the most quick, easy hit is, whether that's social media or porn or substances, obviously substance abuse and chemical, physiological addiction being, much more fatal than the more behavioural addictions that we are describing here. That notwithstanding, it's still a huge problem. And if you look at the way that people, well, maybe it's not a problem, like I'm going to end this video anyway reframing the idea that this is necessarily a problem, but just to say that we are having a kind of adjustment period where humans have only had these technologies and this level of overwhelm with them for a very relatively very short period of time relative to the rest of history, where we've not had these things like changing our brains at lightning speed. Just to talk a little bit more about dopamine. Dopamine is like, I guess I'm not a neuroscientist, and a lot of this I have learned and picked up over the years from watching other YouTube videos, particularly things like Andrew Huberman, the Huberman Lab podcast, Huberman Lab. But the molecule of more, and that's a book title, I've not read the book, but I've heard Huberman talk about it. The molecule of more is a really poetic, beautiful way of putting it, that dopamine is something that we receive or we get a hit from in pursuit of something, not on receipt of the actual thing itself. So the molecule of more, we're always striving for more, the next thing. That's why when we get, how it's the word jouissance, which my 2014 BA art film was about, actually, about how when we eat like a bit of chocolate, it's actually a little bit painful because we don't get, I mean, we can be maybe really, really present with it, but there's a little bit of, often a little bit of a pang, which is the wanting the next bit, and it's eating a pudding and wanting the next spoon, and it's why the scroll, the infinite scroll, is so genius and so powerful and so effective in consuming us, because it's just tapped in, it's just like resonated with that capacity that we have to be like, what's coming next, what's coming next, what's coming next. And then the people that designed that and engineered that know this and want to keep us, you know, scrolling for, seeking more, choosing other things, being on the devices. And it's definitely important to be critical of that. And I know I'm saying this as someone, a YouTuber on this platform, in which people are profiting from this. But I think it's less interesting to just totally dogmatise and judge it and dismiss it all and throw the baby out of the bathwater when there's something interesting going on, which I'll come back to in a minute. But I just want to talk about the difference first between that dopamine and then the serotonin, which is definitely the thing that really is termed as well the here and now hormone. And it's like a softer, gentler high than that dopamine pursuit. The serotonin being something that we have it right here. You know, we're in presence, we're in harmony, we're in connection, and it might be with other people. I think the flow state in art and creative expression is probably more akin to like a serotonin trip, where there's maybe dopamine that has driven that activity and dropping in because there's an eventual goal of like producing or achieving something that will be shared or get something. But I think being in that rhythm, in that flow, in that here and now high of the present moment is really beautiful, and something to try and cultivate in the context of this crazy dopaminergic world. So with that, the last thing I'll talk about in terms of presence is I guess what I would like to advocate or propose is that certainly there's a thing with creative people, there's this anxiety about, you know, posting and like sharing your work, and quantity over quality, and how content creation is just like proliferating everywhere and there's not room for everyone. And a lot of that thinking comes from a scarcity mindset, because ultimately if you think about cell division, what happens with life is that it just triplicates and quadruplicates, and it just divides and divides and divides until there's a million cells, and you know, things just do, like life just thrives. That's how life works, it just multiplies. And it's the same with the exponential curve of the content creation and the data that we are seeing now in this day and age. And it's not necessarily something that we have to judge and demonize as bad. It's like, it's just what happens, and there's a lid that's been lifted and it's all coming out and it's all coming through. And ultimately it's like, do you trust humanity to navigate that mindfully? Right now, not so much, because there are all these other forces and all of these evil companies or whatever that are like utilising that and profiting from that, and profiting from getting us to be in these sort of rat race, rats in Skinner boxes. There's an experiment about rats going for cocaine and water or something that I'll link below that relates to this a little bit. But I like the idea that, you know, in order to have consciousness and awareness of how we're acting, things need to swing to a certain extreme, and maybe this saturation point we're reaching with content creation and being so like dopamine focused is actually what's going to lead us to maybe swing back the other way a little bit and recognize actually that a lot of the time, every time you're sharing something or documenting something photographically, videographically, creating a post, there's all this creation happening, and really it's an opportunity to perform something. And even when it's like taking photographs at a, you know, of your food, you know, there's a performance of presence that's happening there. So I think it's interesting how there's like the dopamine of wanting to post and get likes or validation or success or whatever, and the moment of capture being actually an opportunity to tune in and sink in and actually perform presence in a way that the camera or the documentation or the content creation reinforces. And I think that humans need repetition, and it doesn't matter if we know something in our bones, it's like we need to see it reinforced. So we're giving ourselves little reminders constantly in the artwork, in the content, in the tutorials. We're giving ourselves all of these reminders everywhere, you know, like breath work, like learning how to breathe. We need to learn how to breathe. I used to think, fucking hell, like that's a new law that we need breath work. We need to teach us how to breathe. But there I am, I've forgotten how to breathe. I'm holding my breath. So I think all of these things that are coming through, all of this wisdom, all of this crap, all of it, all this proliferation, ultimately, let's hope that it's leading us to a place of awareness, repeating things enough that we are learning and increasing our awareness, and that the dopamine, splayed attention span, scrolling, infinite loop stuff is actually also serving something in terms of our attentional capacities and focus, and maybe it's inviting us to cultivate our focus and guard it against all of the competing stimuli. There are all these millions of other browser tabs that leave us in a state of overwhelm. If any of this resonates or appeals, or you have a particular focus or energy, attention, grounding tips or practices, please pop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear how people concentrate or focus and how you find things like the ADHD terminology and overwhelm and how you navigate that, because whilst I'm not on any kind of formal diagnosis journey, I definitely really resonate with a lot of the language there around overwhelm and focus and not being able to do anything except to pursue the cheap dopamine of whatever passing fancies are there. And also, lastly, just like, subscribe, share, and check out more on Heart School and what we can offer you in terms of community connection and one-to-one coaching containers in the caption. Thank you once again, and just allow yourself to cultivate that here and now hormone, the old serotonin, the old flow a little bit, as well as the dopamine. Thank you.